Chris Doering. He takes the time to chat with us. Chris, what's going on, my friend? How are you?
Hey, I'm good, Chris, man. Hard to believe that we're at the finish line here for your program and my program, the season being over with, as you talked about. Never would have imagined both of these teams missing bowl eligibility this year.
Yeah, Chris, I want to get in that in a second. I just want to tell you kind of a funny story. So I'm sitting there watching the games this weekend, and I'm obviously like in the studio rocking whatever. And I think it's halftime of maybe it was Tennessee Vandy or halftime of one of the games. And my girlfriend comes up and she's watching the halftime, and she's like, "Wait, isn't that?" She didn't even realize Chris Doering on SEC now. So that was kind of a funny. I'm like, this has been going on all season. I don't know how you're just realizing this. But she's not a big sports person. We're not going to hold
That's
it
all right.
against
We'll give
her.
her a pass.
That was a cool moment. I was like, yeah, that's there he is. That's
Yeah,
Chris Doering. She's like, he's
that's cool.
famous. I was like, yeah, something like that. So no, anyways, man, I appreciate you taking the time. You do a
Yeah,
fantastic job. Obviously, you
thank
mentioned
you.
Florida and South Carolina. We'll start there for both the Gamecocks and the Gators. Let's focus on Florida first. Your team, FSU, comes in, gets the win. It was the battle of the backup quarterbacks. A valiant effort by Florida, obviously, but the
Yeah.
reality is this: you finished 5-7 in year two of Billy Napier. What did you see in that football game? Florida with some of those self-inflicted wounds down the stretch that I think we saw the Gators make at times this season. And then Florida State, I mean, what a great, you got to give them a lot of credit with the backup
Yeah.
quarterback, the valiant effort to stay undefeated. What did you see in that game, and what's the feeling now around Gainesville as Billy Napier goes into a really important offseason?
Yeah, you make a good point. It's kind of a microcosm of the whole season, really, where you see moments of what could be some really good potential, some fun moments. The swamp was buzzing like it used to back in the day when I was there. And you dominate the first quarter. Florida has 103 yards to Florida State's -7. And then all of a sudden, the spitting penalty kind of changes the whole momentum of that ball game. Florida State had three of their first five possessions, three and outs that ended in negative yardage, and you give them a 15-yard penalty after you have them in a second 12 situation. They go on a 10-play, 90-yard drive to score, and it feels much different at 12-7 than it did 12-0. Obviously, you missed two field goals in that ball game. Not only the spitting penalty, but a targeting penalty, an ill-timed holding call right before half pushes you back, and you miss the field goal. So it really was a lot of what we've seen is like some the undisciplined, untimely penalties costing Florida. The offensive line was abysmal. Watching the game plan for Max Brown, one of the backup quarterbacks that you mentioned starting in this game, he shouldn't be throwing from the pocket anyway. But to have him drop back at the end, it felt like a little panic set in, and they just couldn't block Florida State. Credit Florida State, as you said, they had a great plan, I think, in attacking Florida. They did hit some big plays early on with some runs that were able to gash the defense, but they kept doing what they did. That's running the football and found a way to win in the swamp, even though not a very good Florida team. It's always a tough place to play, and for them to survive without Jordan Travis is a compliment. And now they turn their attention to Louisville heading to Charlotte this week.
Now, Chris, to Columbia we go. South Carolina falls to Clemson 16-7, ends their season also at 5-7. Your thoughts on this ball game? Again, Chris, this was the SEC Network primetime game.
Yeah.
Much lower scoring than I think a lot of us expected. I mean, a defensive slugfest. Clemson doesn't even score an offensive touchdown, yet they win the football game. Obviously, the tone set really early on with the backwards pass, fumble, Clemson scoop and score. It really felt like to me, Chris, and I talked about it a lot last week, that I felt like the thing that had held South Carolina back, what had been the Achilles heel for the Gamecocks since literally game one against North Carolina, the offensive line was going to show itself yet again. And that's exactly what I feel like happened, Chris. Like, this team was what it was from week one all the way until the end of the season. What did you see from that game against Clemson, and would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I felt like they fought really hard, and that's kind of what we've seen for the entirety of the season. I mean, I don't know that anybody nationally has been decimated by injuries more than what the South Carolina team has. Keep rolling guys out there, keep trying to put up the good fight. It was a valiant effort to win, the previous three ball games, to put themselves in position to even get to bowl eligibility. You got the game at home. It's a great environment against your arch rival. And unfortunately, you just run out of bullets. And it felt to me like the defense like the week before, did everything they could possibly do to keep Clemson within arm's reach, to just hope that you could maybe put one drive together like they did in the first half to be able to win that ball game. But I think they just ran out of gas, physically, emotionally, talent-wise. Just kind of ran out of gas and couldn't do what they needed to do. But there's a lot of really bright spots. I think a lot of young guys getting a chance to play meaningful snaps this year. So I think, if Coach Beamer can keep together the roster and not have the kind of mass exodus that he had last year, if they can, add another signing class that they did last year, I really feel like the team, the program will take a big step forward next year. And honestly, I thought South Carolina and Arkansas may have been victims of their early success for both of those coaches, maybe winning too much too soon. This regulates things a little bit. I know fans don't like to hear that. They certainly don't like the cries for patience, but I do think things are headed to a much better future there in Columbia.
To the Plains, Chris, have you ever seen a finish like that? 4th and 31, and Jalen Milroe throws up a prayer. I was sitting there thinking, hey, this is going to clear up the college ball playoff chatter, a lot when Alabama falls to Auburn. I thought no chance, no way they convert. And I mean, that, especially if Bama somehow, some way, if they can beat Georgia, if they can get in the playoff and Lord knows win a national title, that Iron Bowl, I mean, that's going to go down as maybe not better than the kick six, but one of the best we've ever seen. Your thoughts on the resiliency by Alabama, and then for Auburn? I mean, you can look at it one of two ways, right? Like, man, that's a great sign for Hugh Freeze's program. I think they're going to be a problem in a couple of years, right? I think that program is headed in the right direction, but that's one of those losses, Chris. That's really tough to get over.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think you got to look at Auburn last year. They missed bowl eligibility. The program was in complete disarray. The fan base seemed very fractured. Hugh Freeze has come in and giving you hope. I mean, you get to bowl eligibility with 6 wins. Sure, it didn't finish the way you wanted to, losing to New Mexico State and losing a heartbreaker at home to Alabama. But you got a tremendous recruiting class put together right now. You hired Hugh Freeze to do a couple things, bring excitement to the program, which he certainly has, and to beat Alabama, which he was on the cusp of doing. The difference is right now, Auburn's at a position where they hope to win when they get into late game situations, and Alabama knows that they're going to win. This was not a great performance from Alabama. It's not a great season for Alabama, but I thought that game was a microcosm of Alabama's season, where they've had moments of looking really flawed. They've created issues of their own making that potentially put them in positions to lose. The terrible peel back block after you get down inside the 10-yard line. They just had every opportunity to kind of seize that game, and they shot themselves in the foot. I was shocked to see that Auburn was able to run the ball for 244 yards in that ball game after they struggled to run it against New Mexico State the previous week. But Hugh Freeze, Philip Montgomery do a great job in the run game, creating some of those gap scheme runs that allow you to get some even numbers on the front side. So I give them credit for manufacturing offense where they weren't able to throw the ball at all. But at the end of the day, the failure on 4th down, at 4th and 31, any part of the field, you got to get off the field. I hated the defensive call by Ron Roberts, only rushing 2. Those guys were there just to try to contain. Like the thing I would want more than anything is Jalen Milroe to try to scramble from the 31-yard line, as opposed to stand there for 6.5, 7 seconds and find somebody that gets open. I know that's a play call that Coach Roberts would like to have back. But it is funny, though, as you mentioned it, not going to live up to kick 6, probably not going to live up to the prayer of Jordan Hare either. But to think about 3 of those iconic moments occurring in that same stadium, and 2 of them happening against Alabama, really wild to think about some of the endings that we've seen there in Jordan Hare.
Chris, we saw a pair of tight games both with Alabama and Georgia this past weekend on rivalry weekend. Obviously, we saw a ton of crazy results as well. How difficult is it, would you say, to and both coming against unranked opponents, and you get yourself up for these rivalry games? Obviously, the Iron Bowl a little bit different than Georgia Tech, but both significant in their own respects, obviously. Is there a certain difficulty to getting up for those games or getting ready for those games when you've got the SEC title game looming? That is like that's what everybody wants to talk about. Everybody's thinking about. It's almost like you're somewhat especially if you're on the Georgia side, you're like forcing the conversation of the rivalry. Like, is it tough? Can you speak to as a player? Is it difficult? I know for you guys, maybe it wasn't as tough because FSU, it was always you guys were like top 5 teams, but I have to imagine there's a sense of like, it's a challenge for Kirby Smart and Nick Saban to get their teams locked in for those games because we saw Georgia beat Georgia Tech by 8 points. And I don't think anybody's sitting there saying that Georgia's only 8 points better than Georgia Tech. So speak to that, the challenge that is.
It's a great point. And even though we did play Florida State every year before we went to the SEC championship game, it was very difficult. And Coach Spurrier used to talk about it all the time, that the more important game was winning the SEC championship game than it was beating Florida State. And that, during my time there, we lost we lost 3 and tied 1, and one of those we had a rematch in the Sugar Bowl before my senior year when we finally won at home. And I think Coach Spurrier realized it was equally as important to go beat your in-state rival, what that did in terms of the hierarchy in college football, but also with the recruiting implications too. So I think it's really challenging having to play your big rival and then having to play the SEC championship game the very next week. I thought it was interesting. I don't know if you watched the Georgia Tech game in its entirety, but at the beginning of the ball game, they showed inactives. Like inactives are what are labeled in the NFL. Like they had no Brock Bowers, no Ladd McConkey, no Ra Thomas, amongst others. And I don't know how available those guys were, what the decision making process was for deciding not to play them. But it was almost felt like, hey, we don't need these guys. Let's get them healthy for the next week. And that's an interesting message to send to your team as well. It really felt like a survive and advance game. They did that. It was an 8-point ball game late. Georgia played around a little bit too much defensively, gave up some big plays that was out of character. But for them to move on, get a week to rest up those players, and now, seemingly being more healthy heading into Atlanta, I think mission was accomplished.
Chris, we'll stick with that. It is SEC championship week, Alabama and Georgia. Simply put, man, what you're most excited to see? Obviously, we sit here on this Monday. This game will be broken down all week long. You guys will do that. Everyone will do that. But what chance do you give Alabama? Obviously, they've come a long way since early in the season. We all know what's on the line here. Georgia's the back-to-back national champions. But anytime Georgia and Alabama do battle in Atlanta, especially, it's a lot of fun. Which side are you leaning? Matchups you're most excited to watch? Like, what are you most looking forward to in this ballgame?
Well, we think about Atlanta being almost like a home game for Georgia, but it really is someplace that Alabama's really comfortable as well. Nick Saban's 10-1 there in the city of Atlanta as the head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide, has never lost in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I think in the past, he kind of relishes the opportunity to be the underdog. And right now, Georgia, I think, a 5.5 point favorite to win the ball game. So a great opportunity to use the disrespect card again and being overlooked and create that chip on the shoulder. But both of these teams are playing with a lot of confidence. It's been fun to watch the progression of Alabama and specifically Jalen Milroe. I didn't necessarily love the post-game sound of him calling for himself to win the Heisman, but I understand in the moment there's some excitement that takes place with a win like that. But I think the thing for me is just watching how Georgia chooses to defend Jalen Milroe. He's so dangerous with his legs. And I was trying to think about this, Chris, last night. Correct me if I'm wrong. I can't remember Georgia playing a mobile quarterback this year where you have to kind of decide how you're going to rush him. A lot of teams on third down decide to use the spy. But a spy sometimes, takes a guy out of coverage, takes a guy out of rushing. And so it'll be interesting to see how Kirby goes about and Dan Lanning go about attacking Alabama's offense, because some of the biggest plays that Alabama makes this season, some of the biggest ones they made last week were third down scrambles where you get an opportunity to have defenders with their back turned and break contain and run for long distances. So I think that's one of the things I'm most looking forward to, but I think it's going to be a tremendous ball game. There haven't been many SEC championship games where we've gotten 2 8-0 teams within the league, and that's what we get this year. It just shows that the more things change, the more things stay the same with Alabama and Georgia's dominance in the SEC.
Yeah, Chris, you're speaking to Jalen Milroe and their what they present, what they pose offensively. I feel like we're headed towards a higher scoring SEC title game. I mean, nobody's been able to stop Carson Beck, the Mike Bobo offense, especially if they get Lad McConkey back. We all know about Brock Bowers, Oscar Delp at the tight end spot. And then Alabama, again, like you mentioned, with the scrambling ability of Jalen Milroe. And I feel like he's really coming to his own, and Tommy Rees and company, they've really – the offensive identity sort of evolved. The season's going. I feel like it's going to be a shootout, personally, at this point. Now, again, you got two great defenses, two great
What's the
front
total?
sevens.
Have you seen the total on it yet?
I think it's 54.5. So
let's pump the over then, right?
I'd probably go over there. That feels to me like an over. I think it's going to be like a 35-30 type of game. And again, this is way too early. I haven't made a pick or anything, but it just feels that way. The offenses have been so good all year. But granted, what's interesting, I think, Chris, is neither team has played a defense like the one each of them are going to face. So it's going to be great on great Saturday, and can't wait to watch it. Let's get into two new additions, Chris, in the SEC from the head coaching standpoint. We'll start on the Texas A&M side. The Aggies have officially hired Mike Elko, coming over from Duke as their next head coach. Of course, he spent time in College Station a couple years ago as their defensive coordinator. It was kind of treading interesting waters to get to this point with the whole Mark Stoops rumors, and it sounded like that he had the job. Maybe there was some pushback internally from the fan base, the boosters, what have you. It started on Saturday, really, Chris. We heard that this guy's a candidate, that guy's a candidate. I thought they were going to say you were going to be a candidate. Everybody was a candidate, it seemed like, for the job. But you come back to Mike Elko, which I feel like was the hire that made a lot of sense. Maybe it wasn't the splash that Lanning or Ryan Day or some others would have been. But your thoughts on the hiring? I think A&M did good with this one, and I think he brings what A&M needs to their program. Your overall thoughts on the
addition? I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the Mark Stoops hire would have made a lot of sense. I know the A&M fans weren't necessarily the most smoked up about it, but I think Coach Stoops is a tremendous coach that has great experience. Obviously, the second longest tenured coach in the SEC. May have not been given all of the resources that he needs to take Kentucky to the next level. You had those opportunities at Texas A&M. I don't know how serious the mutual conversations were on both sides between A&M and Coach Stoops, but at the end of the day, it worked out the way that it was supposed to. Coach Stoops staying in Lexington, a place I think that really appreciates him, and he's done tremendous things for. I hope that they're able to pump some more of those resources in to let them have more of the chance to compete at the national level. But I also think that having somebody that understands the unique nature of the College Station area, the unique nature of coaching and recruiting in the state of Texas, the unique nature of Texas A&M and its culture, it needed to have somebody that was prepared for that. And Mike Elko is somebody that is certainly well prepared for that after having coach there and really turning that defense that was a bit of a joke prior to him getting the job into one of the most impressive defenses around. And they've really done a nice job. The fact that you can go to a place like Duke and turn them into not only a competitive team, but a team that really is way more physical than we typically see from Duke defenses. It speaks to the job that Mike Elko has done and the things that he emphasizes as a coach. So I think you made a great hire there. It's going to be interesting to see who he decides to go with as his offensive coordinator. That's going to be a key move, and it's going to be something that will certainly impact Connor Wegman and his future. Because I think if Connor Wegman stays healthy. A&M probably has a much different season than what we ended up seeing there from them this year.
Chris, before we get into the Jeff Lebby hire, again, there was a lot of pushback, if you will, from A&M folks when those Stoops rumors started. What are your thoughts on, it happens everywhere, but it's kind of it's just like the pushback from the boosters, if you will, to influence hiring to that degree. I guess you can't ask your boosters to pay the buyout of a man and then say, well, you have no input on the new guy. But it's a very interesting thing because, you think about it, and I just call it for what it is. Boosters are fans with influence. That's it. They're fans with deep pockets, right? Let's call that for what that is. So, how do you feel about boosters having, it happens at Florida, it happens at A&M, it happens literally everywhere. Your thoughts on how involved they should be. Does it bother you or make you feel kind of
Yeah.
squeamish when you see like you're making decisions based off of that type of pushback? Or
It definitely bothers me. I mean, look at my alma mater. The Jaden Rashada debacle last year was largely because of an over-involved, booster that decided he wanted to, have a big what contest with another booster at another school. So it's like these guys. You have to be careful what you wish for as an administrator, because the more you go to these boosters, which they go to them over and over again, ask them for.
oh, I think we just lost Chris Doering. We're going to try to get him back in here. Here we go. All right, cool. We got you back.
I really believe that this is the athletic director. How much power does he even have now, or he or she have? You have to run stuff through the board of trustees. You have to run it by the president. Now all these big boosters are involved. Like, being an athletic director at a Power 5 school, being an athletic director at an SEC school, certainly is it's a more of a lose-win proposition, because more times than not, you're not going to hire the right guy. You have to hire the right guy for your head football coach. You have to hire your right guy for head basketball coach. Who cares about what the rest of the athletic department's doing if you're not doing well there, unfortunately? And, I don't think some of the best administrators get the credit for look at what, Hunter Yurachek's done at Arkansas. They are good in just about every single sport, but the focus on their athletic department is the decision to keep Sam Pittman. And so I don't think it's a job that I would want to have. And I certainly respect those guys for what they do, but dealing with boosters, dealing with over-involved rich fans, that is not a job I want.
So, Chris, sticking in the SEC West, Mississippi State has their new head coach, Jeff Lebby, who has had a cup of coffee in the SEC, spent time at Ole Miss, obviously comes from Oklahoma, respected as an offensive mind at the collegiate level. Your thoughts on this hiring, his first ever head coaching job coming in the SEC?
I love it. I love it for a couple different reasons. One, he was in the state of Mississippi, and just like I talked about needing to understand the dynamics in Texas, you need to understand Mississippi recruiting. I mean, that's I don't know if it's still true, but a couple years ago, it was the highest state per capita of players in the NFL. So it's a little more of a shallow pool, but there's a lot of talent there. Obviously, you're trying to catch up with Ole Miss, and Jeff Lebby understands the nuances of what's gone on there and building that program in Oxford. And I think you have to do things a little differently, right? I've talked about it before. You can't go out and do the same thing that Alabama and LSU and Georgia do and think you're going to beat them with less talented players, which is always going to be the case at a place like Mississippi State compared to those programs. So you do things a little differently with this offense. I'm excited about it. And most importantly, I think whether you win or lose, it's going to be entertaining brand of football. And he kind of mentioned that in his press conference, that you're going to be proud of the product that you watch when you come to Davis Wade Stadiums on Saturday in the fall.
Chris Doering of SEC Network does a fantastic job. Chris, one last thing, and I'll get you out of here. Obviously, the transfer portal opens up next Monday, December the 4th, and all madness, all hell will break loose for sure. For schools like South Carolina, like Florida, this is an important time. I mean, it's just imperative for these coaches like Billy Napier and Shane Beamer that's how you're going to build and turn things around quickly, because as you mentioned, fan bases don't have patience. And obviously I see that firsthand in Columbia with, Gamecock fans after year 3. I mean, I think Shane Beamer, let's call it for what it is, had a year 3 that if Billy Napier has that same year, he's going to be fired next year. I think that goes without saying. So, your thoughts on just the Wild West that the transfer portal is, the challenge it's presented to coaches, having to re-recruit their rosters, go out in the portal, get new talent. And again, you're not getting a whole lot of grace from fans in regards to, hey, please be patient with us, be understanding. It's win and win now in the SEC.
Well, I told you I didn't want to be an athletic director at a Power 5 school. I don't think I want to be a head coach at an SEC school either, because of all of those things you mentioned. The transfer portal, it's a double-edged sword, right? South Carolina fans experience all of those players that went out. It was tough watching Jaheim Bell this season down at Florida State, or Marshawn Lloyd out there at USC. Like, it's an opportunity to overhaul your roster. I think both Florida and South Carolina have to address the lines of scrimmage. Clearly, that's the differentiating factor when you're talking about the best teams in the country is line of scrimmage play, the best teams in this conference. And Florida and South Carolina aren't where they need to be, but that'll come through, hopefully adding the right pieces there and then adding the right pieces on December 20th when National Signing Day comes along.
Chris, always a pleasure, my friend. Really appreciate you taking the time and looking forward to a great SEC championship game this weekend and breaking it down with you 1 week from today, my friend. Keep up the great work. We'll talk to you soon.
Man. Sounds good, bud. See you, bud.
Yeah, man. Take care.